All right, so in our introduction to apologetics, we've looked at the cosmological argument and the teleological argument. It's now time to have a look at the moral argument. One of the unique, fundamental, and profound aspects of human consciousness has to do with our moral experience. As rational beings, we seem to be in touch with a moral order that is every bit as real and mind-independent as the natural order. We are naturally inclined to believe that there are basic and universal moral facts and values. When we examine our own moral experience, we find that there are several features that warrant this belief. Unique among animals, human beings are endowed with what we can call moral intuitions or moral instincts. The vast majority of us have a powerful sense of good and evil and of right and wrong. There's some things that we just know are good, some things we just know are evil, some actions that we just know are right, and other actions that we just know are wrong. We all know that a good husband is one that is faithful to his wife, and that a good father is one that cares for his children. While a bad husband is one that cheats on his wife, and a bad father is one that neglects his children. We all know that it's good to be an honest person, and bad to be a dishonest person. That a good person is kind, and that a bad person is hateful. We all know that earning your possessions is right, and that stealing the possessions of another is wrong. We all know that telling the truth is right and that lying is wrong. Of course, we all know that protecting innocent human life is right and that murdering innocent human life is wrong. And this knowledge that we have of what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong, is immediate and it's evident. It's not derived from other things that we know. We don't have to reason to these moral values and facts. We just know them in a properly basic way. Human beings are also endowed with a conscience. Our conscience is that faculty in us that produces feelings of moral responsibility and obligation. Our moral experience includes a sense of oughtness. We don't merely know what is good and what is evil. We feel a sense of duty to do the good and to shun that which is evil. And when we fail to do the good, we experience feelings of guilt and shame. Our experience of conscience and moral obligations suggests to us that there are moral demands laid upon us, that there is a moral law that binds us, that there is a moral authority to which we are accountable. And again, unique within the animal kingdom, human beings seem to be endowed with intrinsic moral value. Humans possess a special kind of dignity, a special kind of worth. The vast majority of us believe that the life of a human is exceptional and distinctive and even sacred. It's this basic belief in the intrinsic moral value of human life that grounds our deeply held conviction regarding human rights. We believe that all humans have special rights above and distinct from other animals just by the mere fact that they are human. And it's also our belief in the intrinsic moral value of humans that warrants our belief in human equality. Humans should be treated equally, precisely because they share equal value and worth as humans, and regardless of their distinct physical appearances and abilities or stations in life. It is precisely because they are human that the black human being has the same moral worth as the white human being, that the large human being has the same moral worth as the small human being, and that the healthy human being has the same moral worth as the infirmed human being. Many philosophers have thought that our moral experience provides good grounds for an argument for the existence of God, that the existence of a moral order suggests or even demands the existence of God, or that moral considerations can lead us to the existence of God. A moral argument is an argument that begins from some feature of our moral experience or from some moral facts, and then argues that God is necessary to explain those facts, or that God provides the best explanation for those facts. Although the moral argument for the existence of God is hotly disputed in philosophical academia today, it remains a powerful and compelling argument among everyday people. And there's good reason for this. Unlike cosmological and teleological arguments, which often require working understanding of difficult concepts in philosophy and physics, the moral argument is much closer to home. The argument appeals to a body of facts and evidence that is, as we've seen, readily accessible to any person who reflects on his or her own moral experience. And as with the cosmological and teleological arguments, the moral argument is actually a family of diverse arguments. Moral arguments can be distinguished both by the features of moral experience that are appealed to and by the form that the argument takes. As we've seen, there are a variety of elements to our moral experience that one could appeal to in making a case for God. And there are several ways that God could be thought to provide an explanation of those elements. There are, for example, arguments that are based on our moral knowledge and our moral awareness. Some argue that God is the best explanation for the fact that we have awareness of objective moral truths, that we have moral knowledge in the first place. There are arguments that are based on the existence of moral facts. Some argue that the existence of mind-independent facts about what's good and evil, right and wrong, requires the existence of a transcendent standard of goodness. There are arguments that are based on our experience of moral obligation and duty. Some have argued that moral duty requires a moral authority, that the universal moral law requires a transcendent moral lawgiver. And then there are arguments based on our belief in human dignity and worth. Some argue that the belief that humans have intrinsic moral value can be justified or warranted only if we also believe that humans have been created by a supremely good God and that humans have a special relationship with that God. Now, the moral argument has also been formulated in several ways. Some argue that God is necessary to ground features of our moral experience. Others argue that our moral experience makes God's existence more probable. This is more of an inductive approach. And finally, some argue that God is the best explanation for our moral experience, or they argue abductively. The moral argument does not have the same kind of historical pedigree as do the cosmological or teleological arguments. Although there are traces of the moral argument that go all the way back to the Greeks, and especially Plato, it was the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant that raised the moral argument to a place of prominence in modern times. After Kant, the argument began to be taken up by a wide variety of philosophers and Christian intellectuals. Especially influential versions of the moral argument were formulated during the period of the mid-19th to mid-20th century by the Catholic theologian John Henry Newman, by the Scottish philosopher William Sorley, and by the Protestant public intellectual C.S. Lewis. Today, the argument has come to enjoy serious philosophical reflection, thanks in large part to the work of contemporary philosophers such as Robert Adams, John Hare, C. Stephen Evans, David Baggett, and Jerry Walls. Without question, the person that is most responsible for the popularity of the moral argument among both lay people as well as apologists today is C.S. Lewis. Lewis made a version of the moral argument the centerpiece of his classic Mere Christianity, a book that would become probably the most widely read and most influential work of Christian apologetics in the 20th century. Here Lewis develops his argument in three basic stages. First, he notes that nearly everybody, whether explicitly or implicitly, believes that there is a universal moral law or standard of behavior, that some things are right and some things are wrong. Even people who deny belief in the existence of the moral law, Lewis points out, nevertheless appeal to it all the time when they excuse themselves for not obeying it, and especially when they themselves are wronged by someone else. Next, he shows that all people are breakers of the moral law. People not only are aware of the fact that there is a way in which they ought to behave, they're also aware that they do not, in fact, behave the way that they should. In other words, we all sin. Our own consciences convict us of sins, and only the delusional or the hardest among us deny the testimony of their own conscience. Lewis sums up his two central points this way. He writes, quote, "First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. And secondly, that they do not in fact behave in that way. They know the law of nature. They break it. These two facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in." End quote. After addressing common objections to the existence of the moral law, Lewis argues that from the fact that he finds himself to be under a moral law, which he did not make and cannot quite forget even when he tries, and which he knows he ought to obey, it's reasonable for him to infer the existence of, quote, a something which is directing the universe, and which appears in me as a law, urging me to do right and making me feel responsible and uncomfortable when I do wrong, end quote. In other words, the existence of a moral law implies the existence of a moral lawgiver. As I say, moral arguments seem to be especially compelling among ordinary people because our moral experience is such an undeniable and powerful feature of our conscious existence. The moral order has a way of imposing itself in our everyday lives, and it's certainly a fact of human existence that cries out for explanation. Immanuel Kant famously captures the wonder that is conscious moral experience when he writes, quote, "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the more often and steadily we reflect upon them: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me," end quote. In the next episode of this Introduction to Apologetics, we'll continue our look at the moral argument by considering an especially clear and lucid version of the argument that has been championed by philosopher William Lane Craig.